You step into a world of sand, sweat, and silence, broken only by the crack of bone and the roar of a crowd that has seen men die before and will watch it happen again. Ancient Egypt, the civilization you were taught to admire for its pyramids, its gods, its gold, its philosophical depth, its astronomical precision, its breathtaking monuments built to last eternity. You probably imagine temples gleaming white under the desert sun, priests moving in quiet procession, pharaohs draped in linen so fine it was nearly transparent, a civilization balanced, ordered, eternal. But right now, standing in the middle of a riverbank in the shadow of the Nile, the smell of mud and blood and animal fat hanging heavy in the air, the civilization looks nothing like that, because the games are about to begin. And the 11 brutal games that shocked ancient Egypt were not entertainment in any sense you would recognize today. They were tests of something older, darker, and far more dangerous than any sport you have ever watched or played. The question is not whether you could endure them. The question is whether you would survive them long enough to even understand the rules. Before you picture gladiatorial arenas, before you reach for the Roman comparison, stop. Egypt was doing this long before Rome had cobblestone streets. The evidence is carved directly into stone, painted onto tomb walls with a precision that suggests these scenes were not casual decoration, but proud documentation. At the site of Beni Hassan, a complex of Middle Kingdom tombs built more than 3,900 years ago, archaeologists uncovered hundreds of individual wrestling scenes painted in registers so detailed they resemble a modern instructional manual. Over 400 distinct holds, throws, takedowns and locks are preserved there, not sketches, not symbols. A full technical record of a fighting tradition that was systematic, taught, practiced, and publicly celebrated. The men in those paintings are not performing a ritual dance. They are trying to break each other. Wrestling in ancient Egypt was called by a name that translates loosely as grappling or seizing, and the matches were nothing like what you watched on a school gymnasium mat. There were no weight classes. There was no referee in the modern sense. There was a crowd, there was an official, and there was the ground. The first man forced flat onto the earth lost. But getting there required enduring joint manipulation, neck compression, full body throws that could crack ribs against packed sand, and holds that, if held too long, did not just cause submission. They caused unconsciousness, or worse. Foreign athletes were regularly brought in to challenge Egyptian wrestlers, and the official records frame their defeats as proof of Egyptian divine favor, which means the matches were taken seriously enough to be treated as geopolitical statements. Your body was the argument. Your defeat was the proof. Now move from the riverbank to the water itself, because the Nile was not just a source of life in ancient Egypt, it was a stage. Stick fighting on boats, a practice modern researchers call jousting, placed two men on narrow papyrus vessels, facing each other with long poles. The goal was to knock the opponent into the water. Simple enough, until you consider that the Nile in certain seasons and in certain stretches was home to the most dangerous animals on earth. Crocodiles were not a mythological exaggeration. They were a daily reality. To fall meant to surface again quickly, to scramble back to the boat, to survive not just the fight, but the river itself. Tomb paintings from multiple periods show these water jousting scenes with crowds gathered on the banks, suggesting this was not private madness, but organized spectacle, watched, cheered, and remembered. You are standing in a papyrus boat, narrower than your shoulders, a long pole in your hands, and the water beneath you is not your friend. The physical demands of Egyptian athletic life extended deep into childhood, and that is where the shock compounds. Children in ancient Egypt were not shielded from competition the way modern pediatric sports culture attempts to protect young bodies. Archaeological evidence and painted scenes suggest that boys participated in physical contests that involved falling, collision, and endurance from a very young age. One recurring scene shows groups of boys engaged in what appears to be a lifting and spinning game, where one child lifts another and rotates repeatedly, a practice that in its more competitive forms resulted in the dropped child hitting the ground with force. The children shown are not protected by padding, they are barefoot. The ground is compacted sand and dried earth. The game ends when someone stops getting up, or when the adult watching decides it has. Archery competitions existed as both military preparation and public spectacle, and the standard that pharaohs were expected to meet was not symbolic. Amenhotep II, who ruled approximately 3,400 years ago, left behind inscriptions describing his ability to shoot arrows through copper targets, an entire hand's breadth thick, while riding a moving chariot. Whether or not you accept every detail as literal, the culture surrounding archery was one of extreme precision under extreme pressure. Practice targets have been recovered archaeologically. The distances recorded in official accounts are not modest. Boys who failed to meet the standards set by their instructors were not celebrated for effort. Egypt did not invent the participation trophy. Long-distance running was another area where what sounds like athletic pursuit was in practice something closer to organized suffering. Egyptian soldiers were required to maintain fitness standards documented in papyrus records, and running under full heat, carrying equipment across terrain that offered no shade and no cool water was a regular part of military and ceremonial preparation. But running also appeared in ritualized royal contexts. The Hebsed festival, a ceremony of royal renewal, required the pharaoh himself to run a prescribed course multiple times as proof that his body remained capable of ruling. For older pharaohs, this was not a ceremonial trot. Archaeological analysis of royal mummies reveals the physical toll that Egyptian kingship placed on the body. Rameses II died around the age of 90 with severe arthritis throughout his spine and joints. Whatever the Hebsed run looked like by his later years, it was not comfortable. You were watching a man prove he could still move while his skeleton argued otherwise. Weightlifting and stone carrying left their most visceral record, not in paintings, but in the bodies of the workers themselves. Studies of skeletal remains recovered from cemeteries near Giza show compression fractures in vertebrae, fused joints, stress lesions on long bones, and wear patterns consistent with decades of carrying enormous weight in asymmetric positions. These were not athletes training for competition. They were laborers whose work was the competition, a daily contest against material and gravity that they could not walk away from. But formal lifting contests did exist, documented in certain administrative records and mentioned in accounts of military selection. The man who could lift and carry the heaviest stone over the longest distance proved something that no speech could match. He proved it in muscle and bone and blood. Stick fighting on land, distinct from the water jousting already described, was a formalized combat sport practiced across multiple periods of Egyptian history. Long wooden staves, sometimes padded at the striking end and sometimes not, were used in one-on-one contests where strikes to the body and head were permitted. Depictions from the New Kingdom period show fighters with what appears to be rudimentary protective gear over certain parts of the body, but the head, in many scenes, is unprotected. Texts from the period describe fighters bleeding from head wounds and continuing. The match was not stopped because someone bled. It was stopped because someone could no longer stand. Modern forensic analysis of certain mummies has revealed healed fractures in forearm bones, consistent with defensive blocking. The skeletal evidence of a lifetime spent absorbing blows that did not quite kill, but never quite forgot to leave a mark. Swimming competitions in and along the Nile carried risks that no amount of athletic skill fully neutralized. Egypt produced extraordinarily capable swimmers, documented in military records as scouts and messengers who crossed waterways under conditions that would terrify a modern open water swimmer. But competitive swimming in the ancient Nile meant sharing the water with hippos, crocodiles, and parasitic organisms that caused diseases so severe entire villages were weakened by them. Schistosomiasis, a parasitic infection spread through infected water, has been identified in Egyptian mummies thousands of years old. The swimmer who emerged victorious from the water was celebrated. The swimmer who emerged infected was treated with a pharmacopoeia of remedies that ranged from mildly effective to dangerously experimental. Swimming fast was not your only problem. Surviving what the river left inside you was the longer contest. Bull leaping, though most famously associated with Minoan culture, has left enough trace evidence in Egyptian artistic and administrative records to suggest that some version of athletically engaging with large animals existed in certain ceremonial contexts in Egypt as well. Hunting lions and other dangerous animals was, for the ruling class and military elite, a performance sport as much as a practical activity. Royal hunts were documented, commemorated on monuments, and treated as proof of courage, divine favor, and physical dominance. But the hunter on foot, armed with a spear or bow, facing an animal whose weight exceeded his own by a factor of several hundred, was performing something that had no safety net. The lion did not understand ceremony. Amenhotep III officially recorded the hunting of over 100 wild lions during his reign. Even assuming significant exaggeration in the royal account, that number implies proximity to an animal that kills professional hunters today with alarming regularity. The most psychologically brutal game in ancient Egypt may have been the one that looked most like celebration. Tug-of-war scenes preserved in tomb paintings appear festive, communal, even playful. Groups of men pulling against each other, supervised by officials, cheered by onlookers. But the conditions under which these contests took place, full desert heat, no water break visible in any scene, men collapsing forward or backward into the group, the rope made of plant fiber that could cut into bare hands with the friction of sustained resistance, transformed what looks like a village game into a test of collective endurance that left real physical damage. Rope burned through the palms to the point of exposed tissue was not a metaphor in that environment. It was a morning in ancient Egypt. You hold the rope. The sun is already past comfortable. Your hands are already bleeding. The other side is not letting go. Neither are you, because letting go means something in this world that it does not mean in yours. It means you were weaker, and in ancient Egypt, weakness was not a condition that came with sympathy. It came with consequences. Standing here now in your clean clothes, your hands soft from a life that has never required you to pull a rope until your palms tore open, your muscles untested by anything that would cause a Middle Kingdom physician to reach for his splints, the distance between your daily life and that world is not measured in years. It is measured in something more fundamental, in the absence of pain as a daily companion, in the presence of choices those athletes never had. Think about the next time you complain about a hard workout, the next time you decide an activity is too uncomfortable to continue, the next time you walk away from something difficult because the option to walk away exists. In ancient Egypt, the option often did not exist. The game had already started, the crowd was already watching, the river was already moving beneath the boat, and whatever was in that water with you was already awake. If there is a place, a civilization, a ritual, a period, or a world you want to see reconstructed, without the beautiful version, without the myth, without the romanticism, the raw and unfiltered reality behind the story, drop it in the comments. There is always another layer that history forgot to mention.